So with that, Kevin Franklin is on our board of directors, and he's offered to give us a really fun presentation. And are you ready to go?
All right, I think we're ready.
Okay, there you go.
You are? Ready.
All right.
Well, thank you, Stephen. And Doug, that talk was just absolutely amazing. I mean, this is a true adventure. So I hope my talk can be a little bit more interesting from things that are interesting to me, because there's no way I can keep up with Doug's talk. So we all had this interesting global pandemic where we had to stay home. And I wanted to make this one about places you can kind of go revenge travel to a little bit. Like if you want to go around the world and check out some seaplanes, this is kind of what I was trying to go for. So the name of the talk is 10 Seaplanes You Can Drag Your Spouse Around the World to Go and Visit. And get ready, Hannah. So I haven't been to all of these. I've been to a couple of them, but a lot of them I really do want to go see. And I can almost guarantee no one in this room has been to all of them. So I hope we'll see. Afterwards, tell me if you have. So how this is going to work, I'm going to talk about a seaplane, explain why it's interesting, and then maybe where to find it. And I had to come up with some conditions. It had to be in an interesting and fun location, so somewhere you'd actually want to go to, preferably in the shade, historically significant, and very rare. So that supermarine on the right is a really good example. I tried not to use planes on this list that you may have already heard of. So, the one at the Mohai is off. The Spruce Goose or the Hercules, everyone knows what that is. We all know about the Mars, and I tried to stay away from stuff that is kind of common. But I did want to mention two people in the crowd. Lynn and Scott actually got engaged on the bridge of the Spruce Goose. So Lynn and Scott are here somewhere. Congratulations. That was a pretty cool place. I think she's wearing Howard Hughes' hat there in the pilot's seat. All right, so number one, Jimmy Buffett's A Pirate Looks 50. Has anyone read this book? A few people. I found out it's actually not about investing advice. I was looking for a stock market investing book, and I searched Buffett, and I ended up reading this instead. And it's about his adventures in this wonderful albatross all through the Caribbean. And if you've heard of the Jamaica Mistake, this is the one where he and Bono got shot at. Really interesting story to go look. And he, of course, wrote a song about it. You can find this plane at, of all places, Universal Studios Orlando, which I know is everyone's favorite theme park. There's a museum. It's not really a museum. It's more of a hotel here called the Royal Pacific. And it's a hotel inspired by that poster we all know, Fly to the South Seas Isles from Pan American, the Lawler poster. And it's pretty cool. The whole place is themed like it. And then right next door, you can get your cheeseburger in paradise at, right there. There it is, the Hemisphere Dancer. I also recommend the Jurassic Park River Adventure ride. It's still the original, hasn't been upgraded quite yet. And I made Hannah go on it a while ago. It's awesome. Okay, so number two, the Boeing 314 Clipper. We all know and love this plane. It's kind of hard to chase down. It is kind of a Seattle icon. This is actually the Duwamish River right here where they're getting it ready to go. And I couldn't stop staring at this photo of the plane, and then I finally realized that there's this guy doing this weird thing right here. I don't know what he was up to. So there's one that we know of where we could probably go find it if we all got together and we had a boat and a lot of scuba gear. We could track down the one that's 650 miles east off of Oahu. It's extremely deep. We might need Hughes' Glomar Explorer to go pull it up again. But if you want to read about this one, the museum's own Bob Bogash has this wonderful website. If you haven't seen it, I really recommend you go check it out. He has these truly great stories, and he's very inspiring about how to go find this plane. And there are a few places in the world you can track down a little bit of Clipper history. One of them is the Foynes Museum in Ireland, where they have a mock-up of it. It's not the real thing. It's not the real McCoy, but it is a pretty cool thing to have there, and it's honors the fact that the 314 used to go there. And then right upstairs in the Boeing airplane barn on the other side of the building, a lot of people miss this when they're walking through, but there's a few pieces of the 314 still there. And every time I come here on a museum tour, I always stop there and take a look at them. A few other spots, if you want something a little more tropical, there's a Lost Seaplane base here. Island Seaplane Services used to operate out of their McGee's company for a long time. And that's actually the channel that the 314 used to land in, and it still looks like that from space, and you can kind of go along the way there. And there's a little place called the La Marina Sailing Club, which is a tiki bar right on the corner there that has not changed since around 1980 or something like that. There's rats on the ground, but it's great. Okay, so here's another one. We got to go fast. They told me 10 minutes, so I've only got a little bit of time per seaplane. This is the New England Air Museum, Windsor Locks, Connecticut. I didn't even know this was a city until I started researching this plane. And there you can find the Excambian. This is the Sikorsky VS-44A. There were 3 of them. And it's about the same size as a Clipper. And this picture took me forever to find. But, I was so disappointed I couldn't find a real Clipper. And the next best thing, I think, it's almost the same size, very similar flight profile, is the Excalibur. There's the Excalibur there, the sister ship of the Excambian. And the Excambian actually spent some time trying to deliver mail in the Amazon, a little bit like Jungle Cruise. I couldn't find a picture of it, but then it served Antilles airboats, which Doug mentioned. And then it was over at Avalon and Catalina Island. And actually, we just had a wonderful family trip to Catalina Island where we got to learn all about the history of the boats there. It was terrific. But it was called the Mother Goose, even though it wasn't actually a goose, but it was operating there for quite some time. Then it went into state of disrepair and then about a 10-year restoration, and you can find it in Connecticut. So that's another one to go look at. All right, number 4. This one takes us to Balboa Park, San Diego. Has anyone been there? They've got this kind of like nations thing going on. Not a lot of people. It's a beautiful park that has all sorts of interesting architecture. There's a garden there and a zoo, and then there's also an aviation museum. And there they have a Convair Sea Dart. This is a supersonic flying boat. It's got some skis that kind of retract. I'll send out a video later of it actually flying, but it actually would take off and land kind of just like that. And there's 3 left. One's at the San Diego Air and Space Museum. If I go back here, it's actually outside, so if you don't want to buy a ticket, you can just wander around in front and look at it. Or if you're in a rush. That you can find one at NAS Willow Grove, and then there is one in Lakeland at the Sun and Fun Museum. So I'm sure anyone from Florida has probably already seen that. And since you're going to be right beside the zoo, you can go visit Sloth Bear, who is the coolest person at the San Diego Zoo. All right. Next, we have the second attack on Pearl Harbor. There's a great, New Orleans has a World War II museum. They had a really good story on the first attack on Pearl Harbor, and then there's actually a very little-known second attack on Pearl Harbor. It happened a few months later, and the way they did it was the Japanese, they left Marshall Islands, and they stopped at French frigate shoals, and they refueled from a submarine. Coincidentally, the same submarine that could actually launch seaplanes. And then they went to the Hawaiian Islands to survey the rebuilding process and see if the battleships were being brought up again, try to find the Pacific Fleet. And it ended up being a big problem for the Japanese because it revealed by the Americans reverse engineering the kind of the flight path here. Actually, I made this in Google Maps just so I could get everything organized. But they figured out that the Japanese were using French frigate shoals as a refueling station, mined it, and then the Japanese left, and then that, as you can see, Midway Atoll didn't have any sort of warning when the carriers were on their way. So it did actually make a big difference. And the plane that did this, and it was about a 5,000-mile journey, was the H-8K Emily. I first found out about this plane reading a magazine, and it was referred to by the writer in this wonderful way as a sky galleon. And it would circle around other planes, like patrol planes, like the Liberator, in these very, very long circular battles where they're only going around 140, 160 knots, but they're turning these big, wide circles. Probably the closest thing you could imagine to 2 ships of the line blasting each other for very, very long periods of time. And there's a video online of one getting shot down, and it takes several planes, full magazines to just work its way through it. And this is what it looked like on the beat. That might be the wrong one. Hang on. That's the right photo there. So there you can see it's being examined after just being completely full of bullet holes. The one you can find underwater, if you're a junior diver, it's actually not too bad. It's only about 25 to 30 feet deep, and it's in warm water in the shade, the Saipan dive site, and you can go see an Emily for yourself. After the war, a couple were taken as war prizes. This was pretty common when we were evaluating all the technology after the war, and this one was kind of held up at cocooned, fortunately, at U.S. Naval Base Norfolk. And a lot of the war prizes were, torn up or shredded, and a handful made their way to museums, especially the German planes. But the Japanese flying boats, we were pretty lucky this one survived. And it was actually returned and restored in Japan. So it spent a lot of time in Tokyo, and you can go see it. It's one of the largest flying boats left from World War II, and you can go visit it down here at the Historical Museum of Kanoya Air Base. They also have a PS-1, which is kind of the spiritual successor to the HAK, which is kind of an interesting plane as well. All right, on we go. Now we're across to Southampton in the United Kingdom. I was researching this city. I honestly didn't know anything about it other than it was a cruise ship port and it had a museum there. So while researching it, I was looking to try to find if any details about it, and I found this map, which is the location of every British TV show. And I'll tell you that it is one of the only places without a British murder mystery show on the entire island. And by the way, this is the best one, Foyle's War. Yeah, there's no argument. Yeah. So they have a museum there called the Solent Sky Museum, and this museum could probably have had 3 planes on its own. It has a Supermarine 400-mile-an-hour seaplane, a Schneider competitor, which I liked reading about. It's the most dangerous sport in history, as many people know. They used to race these seaplanes in these tight turns and corners, and it was kind of like Red Bull, but with real airplanes that landed on water. Then they also have a short Sandringham, which spent some time mostly in the Australian area, Tasman Airways and Ansett. And my favorite plane there is the Saunders Roe SR-A1. This was one of the first planes I researched. I went to the British Museum and convinced them I was some sort of researcher who was really important and needed to go look through all of their military records. And I thought they were going to tell me to get lost, but they actually let me do it. So I had to sit there and read through all of the history of where this plane was deployed and what happened to them. Turns out one of them ended up at this museum, and you can actually go see it. It's really there. And this is a fighter. So it was a seaplane fighter that came in just right after the war, could do around 400 to 500 miles an hour. And if you look at this cross-section diagram, there's actually a jet right through the center of it. And I'll send an email out later where you can see a video of it flying. It is the loudest and coolest sounding seaplane you'll ever hear. And I also personally believe it's one of the most beautiful. It's just kind of stunning when you look at it for some period of time. So, yeah. All right, we are on to number 7, which is downtown Orlampa. This is Kermit Weeks' place. It's one of the coolest aviation museums I think you can go to. He calls it Orlampa because it's right between Tampa and Orlando, and he's the mayor. And I don't think anyone's been able to convince him that it isn't a real city, but it is just downtown Orlampa. And we had the fortune of, we had a great time flying there. There's Amy and Stuart. We actually got to go visit there a couple of years ago, and we did a trip over in that little sketchy airplane. And Kermit was really kind and met with us, and we got to hear a little bit about his plane and how he got it. He also puts all sorts of videos online. I think he's got like 350 videos on his YouTube page of him restoring different airplanes. Most people here have probably seen them, but if you haven't, go check it out. There's a lot of great stories about seaplanes and his different projects. So this is his 1944 Short Sunderland. It's in the museum. A lot of you probably know, but it was restored and brought back and went to Oshkosh, and we got to go check it out. There's Hannah and Stuart looking at it. But the real plane on this list is the 1935 Baby Clipper. This is Howard Hughes' plane. It's a Sikorsky S-43, and it was just my favorite thing at the entire place. There's only a handful that kind of kept going, and there's Howard, and this is actually his plane. So Kermit has a great story. I'm not sure if it's made up, but it might be. He says he found one of Howard Hughes' starlet's underwear in the back. So if you see him, you can ask him about that story, and he'll kind of tell you all about it. This one was just uncovered recently. I haven't seen it very often, but it's a Pearl Harbor attack survivor. It's in the Udvar Hazy Center in Washington, D.C. It's one of the other S-43s you can go find. And then there's a civilian one painted as a Marine airplane over at Pima, which is also, I guess it rounds out the 3 that you can go look at. But by far the coolest one is the Hughes plane, and it's got a tremendous history, flying for Pan Am and also Hawaiian Airlines. All right, so number 8 is the Sea Duck. This is one of my favorite planes growing up as a kid. I've met people who, when I tell them I fly seaplanes, they actually think seaplanes are only from cartoons, and it's probably this show that did that. So that bear there is actually the same bear from The Jungle Book, but he got a spin-off called Tailspin, which was in the 1990s, was one of the favorite TV shows. And you can find this one on Disney Plus. It's right there. They got the whole thing upgraded to high definition. And if you don't want to pay for Disney Plus, here's my password. It works, I promise. That's probably my fault too. All right, we'll keep going. So Tucson, Arizona. We're all the way down where it's kind of warm. Has anyone been to the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base? Doug has. He's probably found some parts there for some things. It is by far one of the coolest places you can go if you like airplanes. There's a bus tour there that will take you all around, and you can see some albatross. There they are, and there's just thousands and thousands of planes. They get reactivated. So there's one that was a B-52 called Ghost Rider, and when they had a fire for one of the B-52s about 10, 13 years later, it actually came back to life, and you can find pictures of it, flying around, coming back again. There is a dad joke at the Davis-Monthan. They have their F-17 stealth fighter there as well. So they're quite proud of. So if you're sick of airplanes in Tucson, they also have failed biosphere projects and roadrunners. But this brings us to the Pima Air and Space Museum, one of my favorite museums. There's an incredible amount of docents there that will just help you. They'll tell you anything about airplanes. It's air conditioned, it's in the shade, and you can find there the PBM-5 Mariner. This is a 1935 patrol bomber from World War II. It served in the Atlantic and Pacific theaters. It's kind of overlooked sometimes when you think of big impact planes, but they have just an impeccable one there. This is actually from the Pima Air and Space Museum. And if you look on the right of that photo, they even have the tail section of one. And that tail section is also on the top right of this photo. And this is one of the only other Mariner, at least hulks or parts or pieces that you can find. And it's just at the end of the Renton Seaplane Base. So if you go down the ramp at Renton and you keep going into the water down, you're going to find a Mariner down there, which you can scuba dive, and there's some great YouTube videos as well. This plane was called the Flying Barracks. It really is a flying mission creator. It could go on rescue missions. It could go hunt U-boats. It could do reconnaissance. It could move supplies and people around. It had a kitchen, and if you look at the instrument panel over there, it even had advanced radar. And these guys would spend 14, 15 hours a day in it, and they would keep exploring. So, Steve, I'm going to hurry up. Don't worry. It has, well, maybe not. We'll see. This is some more photos of it. It had its own seaplane tenders, which were how it kind of supplied itself and kept things moving around. Some good photos of it here. USS Timbalier was one of the tenders that took care of it. Had some amazing gadgets like the Norden bomb sight and the radar system. Could drop sonobuoys and torpedoes. And it actually had 10, maybe 11 U-boat kills in the war. And that plane on the right has 2 U-boats on the side of it. One of my favorite photos of the war came from it too. This is a fuel bowser refueling it, and it's just these 3 guys in the Marianas going to work. So the fact that this plane still exists and you can go look at it, if you do some research and absorb the history on it, it'll really blow you away. So I've got one more, and then we're all done. This plane you can find in a book. It's called North to the Orient, and it was written by Anne Lindbergh. And there's a beautiful map here, and looking at Mr. DeVries's maps today, I was like, wow, he really is a true adventurer, as Mark mentioned. But Anne did some adventuring with Charles, and this was in a seaplane. So that book, it's 50 cents back then, slightly higher in Canada, right? But this was the route that they took in it, and it was a Lockheed Model 8 Cirrus, and you can go find it along with a big smoke from Ben Chili's Bowl in Washington, D.C., and it really does exist. You can go see it in person next time you're in Washington, D.C. It had over 500 gallons of fuel, which powered its Wright Cyclone, which is kind of amazing. And there's a wonderful story about all the different places it went. So finally, if you're globetrotting and you do go to any of these museums and people find out you're from Seattle, please do remind them to come to our beautiful Museum of Flight. It is so great that we have it here. And thank you so much for the time.